I'm not sure there is an average day in aviation and airports, because it's so varied, and so much of what happens, we're not actually directly in control of, and that might sound a bit scary, but the reality is that. And some of the more extreme events, occur in the middle of the night. Some of you will remember back in the mid-2000s when suddenly there was the scare over liquids being carried. And that descended on airports in the middle of the night, and suddenly all the rules changed. And by the time, by 4 o'clock in the morning, we had to be prepared and implementing a whole new security regime, which completely threw the whole mechanism into chaos. Now, thankfully, not every day is like that, and there are sort of ordinary things that happen, but a lot of it is about managing a whole range of aspects of the business, and how do we influence those. To talk about why I come back, I think I have to look back to where I was before. I came to Cardiff Airport in 2001. I started on the 1st of November 2001, immediately in the wake of 9/11. The industry was in complete and utter turmoil. And I think my first task was to phone my chief executive in TBI then, Keith Brooks, to tell him that one of our major carriers, JMC as it was back then, was pulling an aircraft out because the charter market had collapsed and all the rest of it. So it was all doom and gloom, and it was a real challenge. And I don't know. I just respond to challenges. I respond to that sort of thing, and actually overcoming adversity is something that stimulates me. 2007, it wasn't a straight line because it had gone like this, and if you look at the transition of every regional airport, it's like that. There's no smooth line, and there are all sorts of events, everything from 9/11, Gulf Wars, all of these things have an impact. But we got to just over 2.1 million passengers, and the airport was making about £9 million at EBITDA level, and it was going pretty well. 2005, the ownership of the business had changed, and what began to happen was the model began to change across the group, and the style of the business began to change. And for me, it didn't suit my style, and that's a really important thing. And I think we'll talk a bit about style, and it sounds a bit of an ethereal word, but in terms of the functioning as a manager and a leader, it's really important, because that style either constrains you or enables you, and it was something that didn't fit with the way I worked and the way that had been successful here, and I recognised in 2007 that it was actually time to go. I got a phone call from the Welsh Government say, can you come to a meeting tomorrow? Why? Can't tell you. But it'll become apparent. And I went along the following day, and they said, look, we're going to buy the airport. We'd like you to come and help us with the due diligence, and we'd like you to look at that, and we'd like you to consider coming back and running the airport. And I said, okay. And with the sort of old adage of you never go back ringing in my ears at that point in time, I said, okay, well, I will look at it. But over the period of looking at the business in terms of due diligence, I still knew an awful lot about it. I was still in touch with it. There were a number of fundamental things that played in my decision. One was I'm passionate about airports and aviation. I like challenges, and it was a bigger challenge than perhaps before. I'm also passionate about Wales and Cardiff, but fundamentally, what was clear was that although the business was to some extent broken, the market wasn't. The market had suffered, like all markets had suffered in the downturn and the economic recession, but essentially, what had happened was the application of the wrong practices had led to a decline in the activity here, and 1.1 million passengers from the core catchment area, who largely used to fly out of here, were flying out of somewhere else, across to the east somewhere, I think. Having mentioned style, I think it's a dangerous word. And rather than just sort of say talk about style, perhaps I'll talk about some of the things that I think are important in leading. And I think one of the most fundamental things that for me is relationships. And because relationships doesn't mean you have to be friends with everybody, but relationships invariably mean that you have the ability to communicate, and that because what you need to do as a leader is invariably convey messages, and in the conveying of those messages, you need people to respond to those messages, and you need to add to those messages. But it's not just one way. It's about listening, and one of the most sometimes the most difficult things is actually listening, and it's actually learning to listen. So you're not just hearing the words, but you're actually hearing what's behind the words, and being able to evaluate what's really being said. Throughout my career, and I'm sure it's happened to all of you, you feel it's right. From all the information you've taken in, we should be doing that, and it's right. And sometimes you can't explain it, but it's about how do you rationalise that? How do you understand it? And I think something we touched on before is the question of emotional intelligence. Yeah. And when you start talking about things like that, people start to go, But when you get past the labels, actually, and you look at what it's talking about, it's really important. And understanding everything from emotional reaction to the process of how you deal with information and that intuition is a really important part of the process. And part of the kind of sub-question is, have you modelled yourself on somebody? No, because I think that's enormously dangerous, because whoever you are, that's you. And what's more important is understanding you and your particular strengths and your weaknesses. And it's only by understanding that you can then start to understand your human reaction to the things that happen around you and what people do around you. I think they identify themselves. They emerge. I think you can do certain things. You can give people opportunities to shine. We've got a number of people who are senior managers here today that began their working life on the information desk, and that people emerge. If you expand the space in which they can work in, they either expand into that space or they don't. And those that expand, you can identify that expansion and then start to channel them in leading or managing. What you're doing is managing other human beings. So having some way of relating to them is vitally important, because if you don't have that understanding or connection, you can go and spend your life. There are people that go around and bark and tell people what to do, but I don't think that's leadership by any stretch of the imagination. Leaders are people who lead, and other people follow, and they follow willingly, not because they're driven to it.